Hello, everyone. So today I want to take a stab at explaining's not the right word. Feeling kind of nervousness right now. My body's feeling a little jittery. I just came back from the dentist. It's um, with an exciting challenge that's been showing up on one of my teeth. What I wanted to, well, I think there are three story snippets that I want to share. They're both context and content. So the whole reason I started this series of 100 Days of Live is because of it's an exercise that Perry Chase gives some people. She never gave it to me, but I sort of looked at it and I went, I think this would be good for me. So I'm going to do it. And the whole idea of the 100 Days Live is to show up not with the intent of affecting people or getting visibility, but rather for me to notice what arises in me when I show up in public, visible. That's part of the reason for making these live. I'm not doing videos. It's not for video recordings to upload. I'm not doing writings because those are things I can hide behind and I can edit. But if I'm in effect standing up in front of people every day and just showing up, I see all the things that come up for me. Do I have content? Am I showing up properly? Am I presentable? Am I impressing people? Am I getting engagement? Some of these are concerns that a lot of people have and that I don't, and some are ones that a lot of people have and that I do. Particularly the things around engagement and impressing people. I have no lack of content. But there is, for me in particular, I know I've long had a strong tendency to want to impress people with what I have to share. There's actually nothing wrong or even inhibitory about wanting to impress people. But if the desire to impress people gets in the way of a clear communication, then I don't get to actually see the unfolding impact in the world of what I have to bring, nor am I impressing people. So like I'm generally losing across the board for the things that feel good to me. So in taking, so the reason I want to remind of some of that context or let you know if this is the first time you're tuning in is that so one of the main reasons I learned about Perry Chase's exercise about 100 Days of Live was because I took her program, Spark, at the end of 2020. That was sort of an introduction to what she calls magic-led business. And I'm not going to try to give a description of all of magic-led business here, but there's a key part, there's a key aspect to it that is, so something just changed on my screen. Okay, I think everything's all right. So there's a key aspect to it, which is, like in broad strokes, the idea is either literally or metaphorically, it doesn't really matter. You account for the way in which truth wants, well, ignore the metaphoric thing. Truth wants to come through you somehow. You are a shape of a being. You're showing up here. And the way you know how to express and embody truth has a very particular flavor. It's you. But it is possible to become disconnected from truth because of how the ego works. So if you can get the ego out of the way and let the part of truth that wants to come through you show up more clearly, then in theory, that energy will take care of you. It sounds kind of magical, and it's called magic-led business. And as I experience this in more and more detail, I find both that it's comprehensible, like it's something understandable, the way that physics is understandable, and also it does feel very magical. All kinds of strange coincidences just seem to click into place. It's really pleasant. um, but one way that Perry articulates this is about identifying your essence and resonating with your essence, the thing that wants to come through you, which is to say the facet of truth that wants to come through you. And I went through a kind of a practice with her in Spark, what she called a shamanic experience, where I got in touch with something and I went, mine is clear knowing. Like some people have, like I know somebody whose thing is, mine is opulence. I am here to embody opulence. It's very easy to slide into this language of what my purpose is, what I am here for. From what I can tell, that actually distorts the message just a little bit. It's more like, at least from what I've been able to tell, it's more like each person exists and therefore is an embodiment of truth. And that embodiment of truth is unique. So when you attune fully to truth in a way that is fully lived instead of forced, go willingly or be dragged, there's a particular flavor that can readily show up, something that is much larger than the person. Like the person ends up being a portal for truth that is much larger than even what the person embodies, because all truth is interconnected, because reality is one thing. So identifying this essence gives a clear resonance in the body. Like not something to intellectually understand, but a clear resonance, a feeling in the body that is, okay, now I'm on it. Now I'm on it. It's the feeling of truth, the particular way that truth claims a person. I want to emphasize all of this is my understanding so far of what I think Perry Chase is pointing at. Interpreted a little bit for the things that I see that are just true. So when I say, oh, my essence is clear knowing, or what I am here to serve is clear knowing, what I'm talking about there is, well, there's this sense of, well, what is clear knowing? And whatever that is, that's the essence that I am here to serve. This gets into metaphors, like there is something larger than my sense of self that wants to come through me. And if I surrender fully to it, there is this feeling of it shaping me, and changing my life. And that when I show up with other people, if I am truly in service to clear knowing, then I am in service to the clear knowing in other people. Not in service to other people. It's an important distinction. But I am here to serve that frequency, that energy, because it is the frequency of truth that I am well attuned to. And so that didn't make a whole lot of sense to the mind. That's actually okay. You can just grab the metaphor and say, okay, well, there's some kind of energy that wants to come through me, some kind of thing that I want to exalt in the world, and I'm calling it clear knowing. Okay. So I'm more interested in talking about that, focusing on that. So as I've been, when I went through that shamanic experience with Perry, I came out saying, oh, mine is clear knowing. I was like, I know it. I just know it. Very, very clear. And then my mind got a little confused. It took a few days. But I got disoriented about, well, wait, what is clear knowing? What is this thing? Okay. So this brings me to a second story I wanted to share. It's an experience from earlier today. There's just so many of these things all over the place. So I went to the dentist, had a wonderful conversation with one of the technicians there. I don't know what the proper term is for the person who plays the role of nurses when you see a doctor. They're the dentist nurse. So I was having a chat with this person, and he was explaining all these details about how the teeth work and so on, and a lot of which I was familiar with, but like a bunch that I wasn't. And I noticed, oh, I actually have an opportunity here. I've encountered a lot of confusion around the ideas relating to fluoride. It seems like no one argues with the claim that fluoride makes your teeth harder and more resistant to cavities. It's just pretty much everybody agrees with that. But there's some concern about, is fluoride bad for you? Is fluoride worth it? And my ex-wife actually had an enormous sensitivity to fluoride when they started fluoridating the water indirectly. They weren't even intentionally fluoridating the water. They were just mixing water in San Diego with other municipal water supplies that had been fluoridated. So we got a little bit of fluoride in the system. She didn't know about that, but she started getting nauseated. So we had to be really careful buying distilled water and then remineralizing it so that she would have a water source that had no fluoride in it, because otherwise she would get nauseated and would not be able to eat. So, like I got exposed to this. She did a bunch of research and found out fluoridation started with the Nazis. They were using it as an attempt at mind control and making people docile. I've heard this enough that I'm guessing it's true, but I don't know. These days all information is crap. But also the fact that the Nazis did something even with a specific intent doesn't mean that it creates that intent. There's a whole bunch along those lines, like apparently the fluoride that gets put in the water supply isn't food grade. It's more like a manufacturing, it's a byproduct of manufacturing. It's industrial waste, so I'm told. Again, that doesn't necessarily mean it's bad. I mean, it's a chemical. So what's going on? Is there an issue? Calcification of the pineal gland. What's going on with that? Does fluoride in the water actually affect it? I don't know. This is one of the places that before the world of COVID, this is already a place where we're seeing a big split, where you have the medical establishment saying, don't be silly, these are ridiculous. Of course fluoride is perfectly safe. Here is the proof that it's good for your teeth. It's like, okay, great, you didn't address the question. And then the other side, saying, it's terrible, they're trying to do mind control, they're poisoning you, they're keeping you docile, wake up, sheeple. And I was like, nobody is smart enough to be completely wrong. Just like no one is actually smart enough to be completely right. So what's the truth? What's the actual truth? So I asked this technician, and I had some sense of, like, even in the moment of asking him, I was going, I don't know how good you are at sorting through this stuff, but let me find out. So I asked him, and he ended up spelling out, yeah, I did some research on this. These are my impressions, and yeah, there's a whole cluster of people dismissing on either side. And he described the polarization, which to me was a good sign. It was a very, very promising. So I walked away from that going, okay, yep, seems like it's a mess, but I learned one detail that I thought was interesting. Apparently, so he claims that a lot of the stuff about the pineal gland calcification stories are relating to the apparent fact that Prozac has fluorine in it somewhere. I don't know about that one. I'd never heard that. I found that an interesting interplay. But this is not primarily about fluoride. This is about looking at what's involved in preferring truth. Right? So there's this question of, when we talk about truth, we talk about, well, what is true about fluoride? Should I fluoridate my teeth? Should we fluoridate the water? These necessarily use the mind. These questions necessarily use the mind. You just have to. Right? And when I say the mind, I'm meaning something like an inner computer. I made a video a few days ago describing this. Hey, Jeffrey. Let me see, let me just read this. I have to read it to know whether it makes sense to respond right now. Jeffrey says, recognizing polarization is good, though I feel like there's a failure mode here too, if you default to a middle ground when there is polarization. Right. So this is, Jeffrey, I think you're bringing up a beautiful point. This is actually something I wanted to include, and Yeah, let me just grab this. This I think is fantastic. So we look at the thing with the fluoride and we go, well, is fluoride good or is it bad? Well, maybe the answer is that it's good. You don't want to be, well, it has some benefits and drawbacks because that's the average, right? Or it might be actually it's incredibly toxic for you. Sure, it hardens your teeth, but it turns out that it lowers your IQ by 20 points. Like, I don't know. Like if either of those extremes were true, you wouldn't want to dismiss that. Like you wouldn't want to end up in a situation where you're dismissing the truth. And this is how the mind tries to deal with this conundrum. The whole energy here. Well, but like this is a failure mode. You want to be careful of the failure mode. It is true that there is a failure mode there. And worrying about the failure mode creates a different problem. It isn't to say thinking about it is a problem, but worrying about it, believing the mind's fears, actually does introduce an issue. So what I'm looking at is in terms of in the case of something like fluoride or any other kind of polarized issue, when looking at it, is the dominant orientation of the mind to be in service of truth? Alternatives that are near misses. I've been surrounded by a lot of people who give a lot of thought to how do you think clearly? How do you debias? How do you avoid failure modes? Oh, well, here is some logic about how you avoid the failure mode. The problem with that is that the mind, when it's examining all this, is not in service of truth necessarily. It is in service of avoiding failure modes. It's in service, usually in particular, of trying to avoid fear. What I predominantly see, this has been very true of me in the past, and I saw this a lot with some very brilliant people who put a tremendous amount of thought into how do we think clearly. The origin of the thought for a lot of them, and for me at the time, was largely about look at all of these terrible things that happen if we don't get our thinking correct, so we have to get our thinking correct. And here's a challenge. What if that's not true? What if the mind actually has, the reasoning mind actually has some fundamental clunkiness to it, that you can't actually debias it enough to do the thing that you're looking for? And that the attempt to debias is actually distracting you. I'm not claiming this is true. I'm just highlighting, notice that in the world where that's true, in the world where the mind actually creates internal distractions by trying to debias, instead of the user having a clear relationship with the mind and knowing, oh, this is not a place in which to use the mind. You might ask, well, what is the knowing doing if it's not in the mind? I'm trying to be fairly particular about what I'm saying in terms of mind. The word mind slips around all over the place. So what I want to say is that there is a computational process, the cognitizing process, the process of thinking, and the process that generates thinking. You can think of that as the mind. That's not where knowing happens. It can serve knowing, but it's not where knowing is, any more than knowing is in your calculator. You use the calculator in order to know an answer. Okay. Same kind of thing as, I used this example in a video a few days ago. If I ask you, well, what is the capital of France? When an answer comes to mind, you know whether it's right. Or maybe you know that you don't know. But for most people, I think, particularly with that example, they know, oh, the capital of France is Paris. Right? I mean, just as clearly, the capital of England is Moscow. I mean, London. There's like these alarms, this knowing. The knowing is not the thing that's offering the answers. It's not the thing that's doing the computation. The knowing happens somewhere else, and it somehow is closer to the one that uses the mind. So just noticing that a mind that is trying to make sure that it is thinking clearly, if that's the internal function of the mind, and that energy is coming from a fear, the actual thing that the mind is trying to do is avoid the fear of being wrong. And Jeffrey Ladish is adding, and I love this question. I bumped into this quite a bit. How do you relate to knowing when the knowing can be and clearly is wrong sometimes? Yeah. That means that the function of knowing needs to dialogue with reality. Right? You're not going to get the computer to, the internal computer can't systematically fix that. It can extend the senses to help those adjust. But for the most part, the reason that knowing ends up wrong in the first place is because the computer has something like epicycles stuck in it. It has loops that are trying to avoid reality. So, wanting to ground this a little bit. So one of the reasons that I had such a challenge when trying to identify, what is the essence? What is the thing that I would want to use in what Perry Chase would call magic-led business? What is the thing that I would want to embody? The core of the thing that I'm calling clear knowing is an orientation to this computer so that the computer systematically rearranges itself to be in service of truth. Not the pursuit of truth, not avoiding the fear of being wrong, but truth. And the challenge is that when we enter the mind, as particularly in this culture, there's a strong tendency to enter into thought abstractions and imaginings. This thing of, well, like in this kind of scenario, how would you deal with this? And to talk about the scenario without grounding back in the here and now, without feeling the breath in the body. A lot of the challenge I have is the thing that I am trying to bring into the body is the relationship to the tendency to disembody. It's a little slippery for me. And it's fun. It's exciting. So in terms of this question of how to relate to the knowing, okay, if I go, no, look, it's a great story along these lines. Like my father ran into, I think is a wonderful case study of this. He was utterly sure that so if you look at the map of Europe, so over here is the Atlantic Ocean, and then here's the continent of Europe, sticking over here with the Iberian Peninsula, where Spain and Portugal are, that Spain and Portugal sort of attach to France. So it's like you almost like you take your block of the Iberian Peninsula, and it kind of goes thunk on the lower left-hand corner of France. And between Spain and France are the Pyrenees Mountains. So Dad was absolutely sure, look, the Pyrenees Mountains run north and south. Absolutely confident. And this became a source of a pretty a pretty intense disagreement going on between my parents. This is like, I don't know, 20 years ago, something like that. And eventually Dad said, look, let's just grab the globe and look. And he went over and grabbed the globe and he said, right here is, here is France, and here is Spain, and here, what the fuck? And because it turns out that Spain isn't attached like this, it's attached like this. So yes, it is west of France for the most part, but the connection point has and I may have pieces of my geography messed up here, but that part I'm pretty confident of. That part I know. We'll see if I'm hallucinating. But I've also been on the Pyrenees Mountains. I've hiked across them, and I remember walking across them straight towards the Atlantic Ocean and seeing France on my right and Spain on my left. So, like, there's a lot of convergence going on there. So when Dad saw that, there was this sense of, I swear it used to be the other way. Mandela effect. If you've never heard of the Mandela effect, it's fun to look up. So you look at a case like that where Dad was really, really confident about something. What's going on there? Well, first, I think it's important to track that the confidence is coming from a bunch of thoughts. It was a convergence of a bunch of thoughts. When we're looking at facts that are not embodied, like what is the atomic number of gold? Right? Maybe you know off the top of your head, maybe you don't. Maybe you know you don't, which is an interesting state to be in. But there is a correct answer. But that correct answer is coming from, maybe you remember looking at the periodic table of the elements, you remember seeing this number, maybe you just memorized it, you did flashcards in high school or something. Here's this factoid floating around. It has no connection to your lived experience. Okay? That factoid, the only way to recall it is from a kind of confidence from multiple lines of thought, like the way that here I am talking about I'll tie that together, but with multiple lines of thinking, where, for instance, I don't know, 4 different ways of proving the Pythagorean theorem. And so there's a kind of confidence that the Pythagorean theorem is true that I have that is, it's very, very grounded. Well, the Pythagorean theorem is a weird example. Maybe a better example would be, actually, the fluoride. The fluoride is actually a great example. The way that people talk about there being calcification of the pineal gland. The pineal gland is like your third eye. It has light sensitivity in the middle of your brain. Why does it need that? Because it sees the inner light. It's a spiritual eye. And so when you look at that, like, part of the reason I remember all those statements is because I've heard them a lot, so lots of repetition. And there's a bunch of crossover points, like I'm remembering the pineal gland being in the center of the brain and light receptive, is at the level approximately of the third eye. And that's why I'm remembering this correspondence. And this whole bit about trying to dim the spiritual eye, like I have this image of the calcification almost like a cataract on a kind of eye. And that being associated with this kind of calcification experience thing. Okay, so like I have all of these thoughts that converge, and it makes it easy for me to remember that the claim is this, that some people think this. But it's not part of my lived experience. On the other hand, with something like I was hiking through the Pyrenees Mountains with my girlfriend's parents, right? Natives of France. And while hiking through, I'm very clearly seeing like large sunlit fields off to my right, and like more mountains, but also like seeing land going off to my left. And straight ahead, I can see the ocean reaching across, and them telling me, yeah, right there is France, that's Spain. And straight ahead, you're seeing the Atlantic Ocean. Right? So for me, there is this embodied, lived experience. Now, even that is in memory. It's not immediately attached to what I am experiencing right now. Right? But it's much more embodied. It's much more lived. Because of that, I'm not going to get confused about, do the Pyrenees Mountains run east, west, or north, south? Well, it's lived. lived. So the it might turn out that they do some kind of snaky pattern and that I only saw a little piece of it. But I'm not going to be mistaken about, I'm vastly less likely, I should say, to be mistaken about whether I experienced that, whether I was in the mountains. And whether I had this experience of being told, oh, okay, so there's France, there is Spain, there is the ocean. So the problem with trying to clean up all of the doubts about, well, how do I verify that the knowing is correct, is that if you're using thoughts in order to answer that, how do you trust those thoughts? What is the process you use to trust those thoughts? Do you use logic? Do you use algorithms? How do you know you can trust those algorithms? Because you remember? You remember some theorems? Well, how do you know that you are remembering them correctly? There is no way to avoid this. At some point, you ground in knowing. So I'm not talking about the way that an intuition can know a fact. I'm talking about the way that, like, there's a very different quality to something like, do you feel your tongue in your mouth? What would it even mean to be wrong about the answer to that question? It would mean that you would have to take an imagined abstraction about what your experiences mean and believe the abstraction over your direct experience. Because the question is not, is your model of reality correct? The question is, do you experience your tongue in your mouth? So there's a very simple clarity that everything about using the mind ultimately roots in. It has to. Where does the knowing come from? You don't answer that by thinking about it. You don't answer it by doing philosophy. You answer it by looking. The same way you don't answer the question, can you feel your tongue in your mouth, by examining your mental theories about how neurons work. If you do, that's going up into the mind instead of down into experience. All of thinking, all of the computations, ultimately either root in experience or are cycles of trying to model something else. So I'm noticing a feeling of embarrassment, and I'm trying to grapple with that a little bit. So what I am seeing is really clear. What I'm seeing is super clear, and I'm a little I don't know, amazed at how difficult it is to articulate this. I think that there's a way that I may be getting in my own way here. The reason I brought up the fluoride example is because to me the question was not what are the thinking processes that are involved. Those are results. The question is what's true. There's a way to orient to the use of the thinking process that actually prioritizes what's true. Actually asking that question. The act of holding that question in the place where knowing happens rather than in the place where thinking happens. Holding that query, what's true? Not how do I figure out what's true? That's a question of how do I use the mind. That's a step later. Core question, what is true? Holding that before reaching for the mind does something really graceful to how the mind gets organized. These little, I think one of the effects that I've noticed in playing with this has been this, like, how to articulate that? I'm not scared of bad ideas anymore. I'm not scared of, like we used to talk about information hazards in the Bay Area community I was part of, rationality community. We used to talk about the idea that there are some ideas that if you hear them, they act like a virus and corrupt your mental software. And that it's actually dangerous to let yourself get exposed to that. What are examples? Well, people try to come up with all kinds of examples, and there are no really clear, conclusive ones. I would propose bringing up death is a pretty clear example. Most people go really weird in the head when that happens, and I think that's what they're actually talking about, a trigger ability around a topic, and not knowing how to deal with the trigger, not knowing how to deal with the overwhelm, the inclination toward trauma. What I've found is that more and more, there aren't ideas or possibilities that can threaten to break my mind. There aren't, I can entertain ideas or theories without getting sucked into believing them. This looks incredibly dangerous to people who worry about believing something wrong. Like, I'm somebody who loves exploring physics and mathematics. Like, my master's degree is in math, my PhD is in math education. As a kid, I wanted to be a physicist, and I love the precision of it. Just love the detail of it. And at the same time, I explore a lot of things having to do with spirituality. I hang out with people who dig in, like, I interact with a lot of people who swear by homeopathy. I practiced yoga for quite some time. I'm now dabbling with things having to do with making meaning using astrology. And at the same time, I look at all these things and I say, okay, cool. And first off, I'm not yet compelled by anything astrology has yet shown me about its ability to make predictions. It's a meaning-making framework. For me, the jury is still out on its predictability, its ability to make predictions. And I definitely have a lot of hesitations about things like whenever anybody in the spiritual or astrological cluster, anything in that area, anyone in that area starts saying the word quantum. Basically, every reference to quantum physics is complete gibberish. They don't know what they're talking about. And importantly, they don't care. They don't understand how to think precisely. So I'm able to hold all of this, and I'm unperturbed. I don't buy it, but I don't reject it either, because I'm not defending myself against a fearsome idea. I'm not afraid of my mind being corrupted anymore, because my mind isn't in service to an idea. It's not in service to having a correct model of the world. The mind is a tool in service of truth. And because of that, it can't be corrupted, except to the extent that it is resisting truth. Okay. I see Ian has popped in. Nice to see you, Ian. I've been pondering this lately. Is anything true? I have a whole rant about that. I might give a side rant. And mentioning, quote, I'm not scared of bad ideas any longer, end quote. I like this. Cool. Yeah, me too. It's very freeing. Whew, I see. I'm wearing a little bit of a mask. Give me a moment to take that off. what I see is beautiful opportunity. Opportunity is not the right word. I see a beautiful possibility of how we can relate to these magnificent machines, these minds that humans have. Like, I have this wonderful machine, this wonderful computer. It's so capable of insight and making all these connections and theories, doing all this philosophy, remembers all of these different ideas. It is so marvelous. So how do I use it in service of something beautiful and good? If I ask it that question, then to the extent that it is not already well designed to answer that question, it will give me very weird answers. Oh, I should meditate a whole lot. I should meditate on kindness. And what does meditating on kindness look like, mind? Ah, it looks like sitting down and thinking about people and things you like and saying, I wish you well. Oh, okay, I will do that. Like if I just blindly believe my mind, it doesn't necessarily take me anywhere good or clear. Because how did the mind get its current programming? I don't remember it all. I don't think I programmed it all. I notice myself doing things that do not make sense, that are unkind. I notice in interacting with my girlfriend, sometimes I'll get this feeling of, you didn't respond to the GIF that I sent you, and how dare you? And that reaction will just happen automatically. How is that kind? Even if there's some sort of problem in our relationship, if there is, that's true. In which case, perceiving it clearly is in fact more important and more kind than is trying to force things to be the way that my mind imagines that they should be. So I can tell that I need a lot of iterations of sitting, as Perry would say, sitting in the frequency of clear knowing. Because to the extent that I would want to say something like, God put me on this earth for a purpose. Like my purpose is, I am here to embody and serve clear knowing. And it's really good. It's really, really good. It's very freeing. And it's so beautiful. It is really beautiful. And there's a lot of machinery in me, particularly about making sure that my ideas are clear. Like my ideas are articulated clearly, that are wrapped up with ego, and I can see it getting in the way. So I think I want to wrap this up for today. It's like this temptation, like this professor instinct in me saying, here is your homework. I think just, if you want to explore the kind of direction I'm talking about, pay attention to when you are believing your mind. There's a very simple rule I learned from my work with Wachuma. It's the Quechua word, the Peruvian shamanistic word for the San Pedro cactus, one of the forms of mescaline. When I was working with Wachuma in Peru, around a year ago now. No, 2 years, around 2 years ago. A very clear thing became very apparent. It was like staring at it saying, oh, this is what my tongue feels like. It was like that. It's very much of, oh. And the phrase I found myself saying is, every thought is either answering a question that I recall asking, or is a distraction from a sensation that is currently in my body. I still claim that's true. So when a thought bursts into mind and you go, oh yeah, shoot, I need to deal with that email. How am I taking care of the email? Try exploring. Just ask. Did you ask for that thought? If you can't recall asking your mind to boot up, what is it that I need to take care of? What are things that I need to pay attention to right now? If you didn't ask that, then try looking at what sensation in your body inspired the thought. You spend a day doing this and you will experience some very exciting psychoactive states because the mind has some deep programming in it. I might talk in a future video about distraction programs. These have been a very an active observation for me to attend to. It's very central. It's just a little dangerous to do in a it is dangerous to attend to in a disembodied way. It's very important to remember the feeling of soothing in the body before trying to force yourself to become aware of these ideas and these sensations. So, with that, I will leave you.